We're here for another episode, and today I actually have a doctor that is, in my opinion and a lot of other people's opinions, the leading expert on light mitochondrial health, along with a few other amazing quantum biological subjects as well. And you know, Jack was one of the main reasons that sent Katie and I down the rabbit hole of blue light all those years ago. So we are super excited to have Dr. Jack Kruse join us today. Jack, how are you?
Hanging in there. How about you guys?
We're very well. Thank you so much for joining us. I've been so excited for this episode. It's an honor to have you on this episode with us. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us today.
No problem.
So Jack, I'm super keen to delve straight in and find out exactly how you came across light in relation to health, because your journey started a lot long before Andy and I did. We stumbled across it when we were getting in shape for our wedding, realizing that nutrition and exercise could only take you so far in terms of health. And it was sleep, another pillar that we needed to look at. And that took us down the rabbit warren to find blue light and how that impacts sleep. But tell us, Jack, where did your journey start with light and health?
Well, it started 15 years ago. Actually, I'm lying to you now. It's 16 years.
Wow, okay, a while ago.
Yeah, it was 16 years ago. It was Birmingham, Alabama. And the sad part of the story, not to start off on bad news, but the lady who actually put the meeting on where I kind of had my eureka moment actually died yesterday.
Oh no,
and
right.
It was kind of a bad scene. She got her second Pfizer vaccine, and she died immediately. In fact, she was, from where I am in Florida right now, she was probably 45 minutes away, and her husband was down in Key West, and he couldn't get a hold of her. And they found her dead sitting in the couch.
Oh, that is awful.
Yeah, and it was a bad scene. But she was the lady that actually set the tone for me. She and her husband had hired me to come up with some minimally invasive spine tools to work to do certain types of operations on people's backs. And I created them, and we were at this event where I was talking to other surgeons. And when I got up to speak, I got a horrible pain in my knee, and the room was filled with orthopedic and neurosurgeons who dealt primarily with spine. And one of the orthopedic surgeons' wives came up to me and said, look, I think I know why you hurt your knee just by standing up. And she went into a spiel about a whole bunch of different things that I've probably covered in numerous other podcasts. But it was really, she wanted to tell me about the hormone leptin. And this is a hormone at the time I didn't know anything about. It was discovered the year after I graduated medical school. And what she was trying to tell me is that the hormone itself actually was amazing, but Big Pharma was trying to get in between patients and doctors so that they wouldn't realize there was things that they could do to themselves that actually would improve the situation without needing a big pharma solution to solve the problem. And one thing led to another. She led me on a little bit of a rabbit chase, but I looked at a book that was written by Robin Sharma, and she gave me 6 papers about leptin. And once I jumped down the rabbit hole, the question that I asked was not the question she wanted me to solve. I actually asked the question, is it possible that was what was present in the book physically possible? And this book was a fable. It wasn't, a book that had any scientific validity at the time when it was written. But I took it a different way because of the other papers that she had sent with it. And her goal for me was to kind of go after Big Pharma, because her and her husband knew that I was a centralized type of physician, meaning I was an allopathic doctor that fell into the company line that was all about the solutions that I learned from my medical school curriculum. But what had changed for me was me getting that injury at that visit, at that talk and I thought about it, and I thought about all the things that kind of led up to it and what happened afterwards. And I said, well, maybe I need to ask better questions. Maybe the things that I was taught, maybe they're not exactly accurate. And it's kind of like when you think about a glass of wine, to have more wine, especially like good wine, like Grange wine, where you guys are from, you got to pour out the bad shit and put some of the good stuff in and ask better questions. And when I did that, I asked the better questions. It took me down a path that I didn't expect. And that path actually led me straight to quantum biology. It led me straight to the story of the Sherpas in the Himalaya mountains. And I realized that the story is a story about environment. It was about light. It was about water. It was about magnetism. And where the story of Robin Sharma's book and the Sherpas really met was about those same things that NASA was studying to look for extraterrestrial life in other planets. And I thought to myself, I said, isn't this odd that NASA and SpaceX have combined to try to find life on another planet, but yet, why is it that biology can't figure out life on this planet? If life on another planet is linked to light, water, and magnetism, why are we not looking for the primordial answers of how life is able to do what it does on this planet right here and there? That opened up the rabbit hole.
Absolutely.
That
Absolutely fascinating, and yeah, Shane share definitely similar sentiments to that as well. I think it's, looking at that sort of light, water, magnetism, how it impacts us at that cellular level is so important to understanding, life on Earth, its origins, and where it's going in the future. And one of those topics that you've mentioned there, light, I'd be really interested for our listeners to understand a little bit about how light impacts us at a cellular level. And I know that that's a really broad topic, and kind of take it wherever you want with that. Obviously, there's different forms of light, natural, artificial, but how does it impact us at that cellular level, and why is it so important?
Well, I mean, I think it's actually not as difficult as people make it. I look at it like this, and I always like to start with this because I've talked about it in a lot of the podcasts. Does a cactus grow in the tundra? The answer is no. Everybody knows that. But the problem is they don't look at themselves as the cactus. And that is the problem. The thing is they like, well, wait a minute, a plant is a little bit different from us. And then when you dissect it all the way down, you realize, people that are born inside the tropics have a different mitochondrial haplotype than people that are born outside the tropics. Your country actually has even a more interesting story about their mitochondrial haplotypes. But the key is that's where you need to begin with this story. So everybody knows that plants don't grow in the same geographical zones. Pineapples don't grow everywhere. Coconuts don't grow everywhere. I'm trying to think of the flowers that grow at Christmas. The red flowers. What are they called? You know what I'm talking
slipped
about.
my mind. Yeah.
It's blowing my mind
like
too.
Poinsettia or something like that.
Yeah, poinsettia. That's it.
Yeah, that's it.
Poinsettias don't grow at the same latitude, and it's kind of weird that poinsettias, at least in the northern hemisphere at Christmas time, they grow at warm latitudes, but yet we celebrate them as Christmas flowers because they're red. And it just dawned on me, why is nobody talking about this in terms of biology? And that's when I decided and really looked into light more fundamentally. And when you look at the spectrum of light from terrestrial sunlight and compare it to the light that man lives in, one of the things that you begin to realize when you take a 30,000 foot view, like what I call a bird's eye view, what's the biggest change that has occurred in man probably in the last 120 years? At the turn of the 20th century, man was still working outside. Today, man doesn't work inside. In fact, with COVID, you guys know, in your country and our country, many people have been kept inside in lockdowns on purpose. And actually, this has actually made things worse than better for most people. But the crazy thing is when you get pushed inside because of technology, There's more blue light from your computer. There's more blue light from the iPhone. There's more blue light from the TV. In fact, the number one thing that nobody factors into this is when you're inside behind glass. Glass blocks all purple light, which is UV, blocks 40 to 60% of red, and it allows the blue light to go right through. So technically, if you live in indoor existence, you're blue light toxic. Mm-hmm. And the thing is there a solution that modern medicine offers for this new environmental conundrum that has come in to the new economy? I mean, the economy of the world, unfortunately, follows the United States. The United States runs a technocracy. I mean, that's why we have Google, we have Apple, we have Netflix, we have, what we call the FANG stocks, Facebook, Apple, Alphabet, all that. That's what drives our country. That's where most of the innovation is. And the United States exports innovation throughout the world. And most of the world has the internet, uses the internet. We're at Web 1.0 in probably 1995 through 2000. Then we got the dot-com bubble, and now we've been in Web 2.0 from probably 2000, I would say right up until where we are now. Now we're beginning to enter Web 3.0, where things will probably change again. But what's the one constant from probably 95 on? We are inside using computers to do most of the jobs in the world. And not only that, we're replacing people doing jobs they used to do with computers. It's more about artificial intelligence, automation, robotics, things like that. The thing that's really happened in my profession, nobody in medicine has actually thought about these ergonomic changes that have occurred in man and how it affects our biology. And there was very few studies being done, probably in the last 25 years, that tied all that in. And when those studies started to come out, most of them came out in chronobiology, which is the literature around circadian biology. That is not an area, at least in modern medicine in the United States, that was really paid attention to. Then everything changed in 2016 when the Nobel Prize was given for circadian biology. That kind of was like an inflection point where people even in the States said, we're really not paying attention to this. And that's kind of happened all in the time frame of when I went through my changes 16 years ago, and I started to talk to people about why light, water, and magnetism may be more important than the food you eat, maybe more important than the exercise you do, maybe one of the biggest untapped variables in research that are missed. If you don't, control for light, how can you say what happened in the lab actually is accurate? There were so many studies that came out even in the circadian literature and the nutrition literature, especially on rats and mice, that I used to chuckle at. I'm like, when are people going to realize that rats and mice are nocturnal creatures? They have different retinas that are scotopic. They're not photopic like humans are. And yet we think what happened in this lab actually makes sense when they're all under blue light and fluorescent light the entire time. And we're going to tell people this is kind of how we see the world. There was a lot of missing links. And then the world changed big time when we started to find out about opsins. We found out about neuropsin in 2009. And we found about melanopsin in 2014. Then melanopsin's story got even more interesting because it was not only in the eye, it was in blood vessels. Now we know in 2017 and 2018, it's in the skin and the subcutaneous fat. And that's when that paper came out at that time, that circled for me when I realized when we found the blue light detector there, that was the end of the leptin story. Then I understood where all the pieces fit. And when the pieces fit there, then the story began to manifest about how the parts came together. And the thing is, with the literature, you guys are very complimentary to me, and I will tell you, I don't want people to be complimentary about me. The way I look at it, the pieces are in the literature. It takes somebody to take all those pieces and put them together so that people understand how the pieces fit. Because when doctors understand how the pieces fit, that's when people's lives can be changed on all the different continents. The problem is the things that we believe, that we learn from medical school, then we can begin to challenge those beliefs because we didn't realize how much are incorrect. And it turns out the number one thing that's been incorrect in most of the biologic sciences is predominantly around light. I'm not going to tell you there's not factors for water and magnetism, but specifically what you guys are probably interested in is this light story, because it is the biggest story. It's the biggest story that's been missed in the 21st century. It was probably the biggest story that was missed completely through the entire 20th century, because if you think about it, the AC power grid was built in 1893, which is the 19th century. Everything that is electric light got plugged into that AC power grid for the whole 20th century. And every single light that was plugged into that power grid was a problem from us biologically. Some worse than others, but nonetheless, a problem that was never controlled for in the randomized control studies that were done in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. So here we are now, 21 years into the next century, and we have chronic disease epidemics on really 6 out of 7 continents. The only reason it's not 7 out of 7, because no humans really live on the 7th continent. And the thing is, everybody wants to blame it on this, that, the other thing. But very few people have actually looked at the light factor. And it turns out the light factor, even today, is the biggest story that they're all missing. And when the Nobel Prize was given, and people started to realize, hey, look, coupled systems, meaning light and dark, are really a big issue. And we need to do more studies to figure out why this is a big issue so that we can tell people, look, if we're going to build a technocracy in the world and everybody's economy is going to be based around technology, we need to start to come up with solutions that are better, because the solutions that were offered by Big Pharma, they were epic fails. All of them were epic fails. There's no drugs that can fix a quantum problem. You have to do something either mechanically or really photoelectrically to change the effect of how we become more thermally efficient in our biology. It's kind of like the story I give to people when I teach them about different things. It's like an airplane. If an airplane has a hole in its landing gear, it may work for 20 times, but you don't want to be on the flight the 21st time when finally there's no fluid left in it and it's a spectacular crash on the runway. And the same thing is true with people with mitochondrial problems. When you have this light problem that goes unsolved for decade after decade after decade, all of a sudden you come to a part of your life and you go, I was pretty healthy up until right here and then all of a sudden, poof. What happened? Because when you tell that to an allopathic doctor, even a functional medicine doctor, it doesn't make sense to them. And I try to tell people it does make sense. Why? Because in evolutionary biology history, we have this story about the Cambrian Explosion. Cambrian Explosion, we had nothing except bacteria and archaea for really 3.8 billion years. And then all of a sudden, about 640 million years ago, complex life shows up out of nowhere. I mean, it just explodes onto the scene of Earth. And I always ask the question, like when I was going through my transformation, how is it fundamentally possible? If we believe Darwin's theory of evolution is true, how does something, every kingdom of life, show up poof overnight? Makes no sense, because his ideas about gradual change leads to amplification. That's not the story of the Cambrian Explosion. And it turns out when you find out that 640 million years ago, that our sun was a G-class star, is in its midlife. Any star that's a G-class star in the midlife actually begins to emit more UV light. That's something that's intrinsic to the star itself. Then you start to go, so the light changed. And when the light changed, things on Earth with respect to life changed. Then you begin to go, so here we are now in the 21st century. I'm asking the same question. Why is the Cambrian explosion and the transformation from an agricultural dominated industry to a technology industry really the same story? It's because the light in agriculture was sun. The light in technology is not. It's blue light. It's blue light that has a different spectrum. It's light when you look at the spectrum of an incandescent, when you look at an LED, when you look at a fluorescent, they don't look anything like terrestrial sunlight. And then the story gets even crazier. It's not as crazy for you guys in Australia, but I went through this today in Clubhouse with a couple of people because they had some pretty specific issues. But like the story of California is really, really bizarre because it's at the 33rd latitude north, which you would assume is not that bad. It's a subtropical environment. You would think people would do well there. But one of the crazy things that happened with technology is NASA knows that around the Earth and high up in the ionosphere, we have one Van Allen belt. Then when technology started in the 40s and 50s, NASA started to notice there was a second Van Allen belt. Well, today, in 2021, we have a third Van Allen belt. Turns out the third one is created by man. And it's all filled with UHF and VHF broadcasts that has been blasted out from places in different parts of the earth. And it turns out because Hollywood is based in Southern California, and that's been going on since the 20s, 30s, and 40s, it's the place on earth, but that's accumulated the most. The third belt of the Van Allen belt is the thickest part. And what does that do? Creates an interference pattern with terrestrial sunlight that comes through. So there's a lot of people out there that think, well, if I'm naked with my skin in the game, my eyes in the game, that it's going to be equivalent to say what happens in Perth or what happens in Sydney, where you guys are. Turns out Perth and Sydney don't have the same 100-year history about utilizing the electromagnetic spectrum. So they're not equivalent. In other words, 33 north is not the same as 33 south. And therein lies the difference. And the difference is from a technology standpoint. The same thing is true with glass, the use of glass. You know, in your country, you have the story about the people in the bush. People in the bush have lived out in nature until they were westernized. The funny part of the story is here in the States, we have the famous guy from Western A. Price, who used to be a dentist. And Western A. Price examined people who were supposed to be wild indigenous people. But yet when you read his book and you look at it, it's always focused on food. But you know the interesting thing you see in every picture in the book? They all ate their meals outside in nature, in sunlight, not in fake light. But see, that was lost even on Western A. Price. And everybody who read his work would look back and say, oh, it was the food, it was the ancestral diet, you know, they ate, you know, grass-fed meat, they ate, you know, milk and all that. They always miss the story of light. And yet the pictures were in the damn book. And that's part of the reason why I say to people all the time, you can be proximal to the answer. It can be staring you right in the face. And if you guys really think about this, the ultimate irony of the story is every day when we get up, we see the sunrise every single day. That is the answer right in front of us. But that's not the light that's inside our houses. That's not the light that's in the cubicles we work in. It's not the light that humans, modern humans, actually live under. That changed. That changed after the AC power grid. That's the biggest part of the story.
It's so true and fascinating. And look, we touched upon geographical differences in light, but what about seasonal changes? Is there an impact to the difference in light that we receive throughout the seasons on our health?
Yes, huge. That is best understood again through food. We know that all foods, like carbohydrates, tend not to grow 4 seasons. The only place that happens is on the equator. On your country, that happens in Queensland. My country, there's no place that technically happens because the lowest point in the United States is the 24th latitude north. Now, subtropical United States, we do. Florida does grow a lot of carbohydrates, but technically the most of the United States doesn't have that. We do have pumpkins and things like that that grow later in the season, but not to the extent that the standard of my American diet has been constructed around. So you need to realize that light does change as it goes around. And not only is there a diurnal change in light, like I tell people, when we measure blue light, we usually use the color temperature of light. So when sunrise occurs, sunrise is between 1200 and 1600 Kelvin. At the end of the day, when sunset occurs, it's between 12,000 and 16,000 Kelvin. That's the change that we see within a day. Well, it turns out the change between December and say November also is huge. You know why? The biggest change is between December and January. It's opposite for me than it is for you. You guys are headed into fall. I'm headed into summer. We just had the spring equinox yesterday. That signifies the day where we have 12 hours of sunlight and 12 hours of daylight in the northern hemisphere. That's when the Mayan temple at Chichen Itza has the light coming down the snake. That means that every day until June 21st, the light cycle in the northern hemisphere is getting longer. That is a bullish statement for things to grow, such as carbohydrates. The interesting thing, from June 21st onward in the northern hemisphere, it's much more bullish that light is bad, carbohydrates aren't as plentiful. That's when proteins and fats predominate. It's exactly the opposite in the southern hemisphere, because your summer is all winter and vice versa. I think most people that watch this will know that. But the interesting part, seasonal changes of light determine how things grow. And it turns out latitude really changes that issue. But it turns out when you're around the equator in the whole planet, you always have 12 hours of sunlight and 12 hours of darkness. It turns out the growing season is the same. In fact, there's only 2 seasons on the equator, wet and dark. I should say wet and dry. That's all that's there. And believe it or not, that actually ties to the growing season there. So even at the equator, there's a growing season. So it does vary. It varies tremendously. And the thing is, you have to think about where you are on the planet, where your engines are built, to understand what you should really be doing or how you live your life. Like if you're an IT specialist versus say a gardener, the experience that you're going to have is completely different.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's one thing that you just sort of mentioned there, which sort of leads me sort of to think of a question outside of what I was actually going to ask is, you know, you mentioned sort of a little bit more about sort of ancestrally, how you're put together, what you're doing, etc., in terms of how you're managing light. How does it work in terms of, we understand it in terms of melanin and building up melanin in your skin in order to help sort of manage the location that you're based in. I've got blue eyes, and I've heard sort of mixed reports of people saying, well, your eyes are very much evolved in terms of northern latitude, Scandinavian variants. I'm now living in Australia. What sort of impact would that have on, I guess, the UV component of light, and I guess the color compositions of light, and how my eyes would handle those. Is there a way to build melanin in the eyes? Is there some sort of mechanism in place, or is it a case that I should just wear sunglasses and when I'm living in Australia, for instance?
No, you should never wear sunglasses anywhere on planet Earth, ever. That would be a big mistake. It turns out that melanogenesis is actually controlled by the blue light content of sunlight. So your wife just asked me the question, how does blue light vary diurnally and seasonally? Well, there is a variation. It turns out that that variation is what controls all the melanocytes in your body. The interesting part of this story, most people are familiar with the melanocytes in their skin. That's what controls either freckling or it controls your tan. The more interesting thing is in your eye, the part of the retina that actually darkens with melanin is actually the RPE, which is the retinal pigmentum epithelium. That is a part of the eye that controls a lot of the photoreceptors in the eye. It's a huge, big deal. And the thing is, if you destroy them or thin them, it has an impact on the things distal in that system. So in the retina, what's distal to the system? That's the central retinal pathways that go into the pituitary gland, and then go into where the leptin receptor is, which is the hypothalamus. So it's kind of like putting a tarp over the retinal pigmentum epithelium changes the reality that you get on the other side. So I like to describe this as, say, if your wife went and put orange tree in your backyard, and you came out, Andy, and put the nutrients and water in the ground, then your sister came out and put a tarp over the tree. I'd ask both of you, are we going to get any oranges? And both of you probably figure out pretty quick, that's not going to work too well. But the problem is we don't think about that when we put glasses, contacts, or sun cream on our skin, because it turns out that the eye and skin has an optical window that's been optimized to work with terrestrial sunlight on this planet. The real difference is the connection wirelessly, electromagnetically between the sun and your mitochondria has a couple of different optical windows. One of the most important one is the skin. Other big one that's important is your blood. Your blood is a huge one. And like when it comes to the eye, it turns out the retinal pigmentum epithelium, where all this melanin is in your eye, as soon as terrestrial sunlight hits it, with all its frequencies that are present in all the 7 colors, it increases the blood flow in the ophthalmic artery by 40 to 60%. That 40 to 60% blood flow increase has huge ramifications for what happens in the mitochondria in that area, but it also has huge ramifications for the type of neurochemicals that are made in the eye directly. And when you really get down to the part of the story we haven't spent a lot of time talking about, which is the magnetism side, what's magnetic in the eye? Actually, the free radicals that are made from the light interaction with the things in your cells. The number one thing in the eye is actually superoxide and nitric oxide. And nitric oxide actually dilates the vasculature in the retina so things can change. It can help deliver nutrients to parts of the retina that normally wouldn't get it. And people who really understand the retina, when they look at it, physicians always look at the retina and go, God must have been having a bad day when he developed the retina, because everything looks ass backwards in it. And it turns out the reason why it looks ass backwards is because doctors fundamentally don't understand light. How light works, once you understand it, it makes total sense why the retina is built the way it's built. And the thing is, even to this day in 2021, it astounds me all the time how people make that mistake. The same mistake is made on the skin. And this is really magnified in your country because, you guys are the people that love sunglasses and love sun creams. And you're trying to put that on kids and everything else because you have such a high incidence of skin cancers. But the ultimate thing that's never been answered in dermatology, but especially in Australia, why is it that all the skin cancers are associated with low vitamin D levels? Why is it the number one cancer in the eye today is uveal melanoma always is associated with low vitamin D levels. Why is it that the ophthalmologists in the United States and Australia teach medical students, teach everybody, even the lay public, that the lens of the eye blocks all UV light, that no UV light gets into the retina? But why is it that God or evolution put a UV chromophore called melanin in your retinal pigmentum epithelium? Tell me, why is that? So I just gave you like 6 different questions that the guys that are experts, they don't have answers for. So you got to start asking yourself the question, is the story that they're telling you down in Australia, or the story they're telling you in the US, is it accurate? Is this the reason why you guys are getting the problem you're getting, and why we get the problem we get? And I'm going to tell you, that's not the case. It turns out the story is intricate, and it's intricate because light is not easy to understand for most people. Light is probably the most complex thing that's present on Earth, but it also allows us to have the life that we get. I think the ancient people all over the world knew that. I mean, the Egyptians knew it with the sun god Ra. The Aztecs knew it. So did the Mayans. I think the bush people in Australia knew it. I know the people in New Zealand who gave life to everybody in the Pacific Islands, including the Hawaiians, they also knew it, that the sun was the primordial effect. It's not until you get to modern humans where we demonize the sun. And the biggest irony of the whole story is we're the only species on the planet that created our own artificial sun, and that turns out to be the one that's harming us the most. It's not the sun. We blame the sun, but we don't blame ourselves. That to me is the ultimate Dunning-Kruger moment for the smartest silly talking monkey on the planet.
So true, isn't it? It is so true. And look, on the topic of this artificial sun that we have created, a question that our community asks a lot is about flicker. Can you tell us a bit more about what flicker is and how that is impacting our health?
Well, the number one thing you need to know is what's special about the light of the sun. Whether you believe that it's a gas fusion model or an electric model, neither one of that's really important. What you need to know is that sunlight is created by the atoms in the sun. So the type of light that we get from our sun is atomic. It's related to the atomic spectra of the atoms that are in the sun. Turns out our light bulbs aren't built the same way. Our light bulbs are built totally differently. And the sun has 2 main characteristics that are radically different than man-made light. The first one is sunlight doesn't flicker. The second thing is sunlight's not polarized. Turns out that man-made light always flickers, and man-made light is always polarized. This changes, those 2 factors change the vector. Like, to explain this, when something, I want you to think about, like you guys would think about maybe cricket, or we think about baseball. When a baseball is thrown at a bat and we know a guy hits it, we understand that connection. Well, it turns out when sunlight hits things in us like proteins and fats, there's an expected collision. Well, it turns out if that light is flickering, or if that light is polarized a different way, the connection or the crash between those 2 things leads to a different signal. So in quantum mechanics, we have a term for that. Most people have heard it. They probably don't understand it well. It's called Schrodinger's cat. You don't know if the cat's alive or dead until you open the box up. Well, it's the same thing that's true at light. When light hits something, if the light varies in some way, the result that you're going to get can be alive or dead. And that's what disease and not diseased are. So flicker actually is a pulsation that your 5 senses can't pick up. We have a special cell in our eye called the Mueller cell. That cell is like a fiber optic cable that goes in your retina directly into the substance of the brain. it makes no synapses, which makes it very unusual in the retina. Why? Because the retina at different levels has synapses all along the way. In other words, there's breaks where the light energy gets processed to electromechanical or sometimes just mechanical energy in the eye to do different things in terms of signaling. Well, the Mueller cells allow the light to go straight through, and it goes straight into the brain. So, for example, a fluorescent light flickers when it's brand new out of the box, 20 to 30,000 a second. Your eye cannot perceive that because it's not built to pick that up. The reason it's not built to pick it up is because the sun doesn't do that. But guess what? The Mueller cells do pick up that flicker. That information goes back into your brain. And what does it do? It creates a different signal in the brain than you would have if you're in sunlight. And it turns out one of the effects, or like what we'd like to say is the alternative reality that flicker gives you, is something called the stroboscopic effect. Okay, and the stroboscopic effect, the first time it was described was in helicopter pilots that had a blade that was rotating above it. And they would get disoriented and dizzy when this effect occurred. The second time that it happened, where it made world headline news, was in 1997 when they used the flicker effect on a Pokemon commercial, and kids all over the world on every continent except Antarctica got seizure disorder from watching the cartoon. And it occurred because of these Mueller cells in the retina transmitted the light in at these weird frequencies. And it turns out you can have multiple different problems, especially neurologic problems, from the flicker effect of light. The number one effect that I think everybody has heard of, and I don't know if everybody knows about it down where you guys are, because I talked about this in Clubhouse today, and I was surprised. I was actually stunned that people didn't know this. The number one disease that's associated with flicker is migraine headaches. And when you get a huge flicker effect, it can cause massive problems, in your ability to decipher light signals. So we now have things out there like iris software that you can put on the computer that block the effect of flicker from things that flicker, like kind of like the computer screen, like I have on now when I'm talking to you guys. You can put it on your phone if you jailbreak your phone. Right now, there's no way to really put it on your TVs and things like that. They have boxes now that you can hook up to your HDMI cable that actually reduce the flicker. They don't get rid of it, but they actually reduce it quite a bit. So it does, play a role there. But flicker is a huge, huge problem. It's one of the problems about light that not too many people talk about. And it's certain people are more sensitive than others, and it has to do with how their Mueller cells are connected in the retina. And it also has to do what parts of the brain that it goes to, because everybody's connections are a little bit different. And it turns out the people that have more connections in their Mueller cells to a part of the brain called the superior colliculus, those people are exquisitely sensitive to the effect of flicker.
Yeah, and I guess those people would be more prone to those sort of issues like photosensitive epilepsy and, the more sort of higher end of the spectrum. Actually a couple of bits of information I heard with a conversation with Dr. Alexander Wunsch in Germany. He mentioned two things that really interest me, and I wanted to ask your opinion on them. He mentioned that the angle of light comes into play during the time of day. So in real basic terms, he was saying that during the day, light should only come from overhead. In the evenings, you should never have light from overhead. It should come up from the ground. It makes sense ancestrally. I obviously like your opinion on that. But another thing he mentioned as well that I didn't really understand too well, and I know you explained things really well, was he talked about something called Mercury Resonance theory, whereby he mentioned, being under fluorescent light can activate mercury somehow within the body. I wondered if you could elaborate maybe on those 2 points. I think that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, the first one is pretty simple. Where melanopsin tends to be in the human retina is in the inferior nasal fields. So Turns out, if you think about it, when we're on Earth, the anode of the planet, the sun usually is above our head. Even if it's wintertime, where you guys are headed into, the sun isn't high in the sky, but it's still higher than, it's never at the horizon except at sunrise and sunset. So it turns out that nature built us so that the melanopsin receptor is actually in the inferior nasal field. The sun's always up there. So we're designed to see that. So if you use artificial light at night, one of the things that you'd be wise to do is make sure the light comes from the bottom to the top. So it illuminates the superior parts of the retina where melanopsin isn't. That would be issue number one. But is modern architecture built that way where we have lights in the floor? The answer is no. We tend to have lights that are above our head or, in the ceilings, where they have canned or recessed lighting. And that's issue number one. But that is a purely anatomy thing that the retina hasn't evolved enough where the melanopsin receptor is present everywhere. It's really in the inferior field because the sun is in the sky. The second issue, Mercury resonance, is very, very interesting. This gets back to the atomic spectra that I told you before about the sun. The sun has a ton of elements in it. And one of the things that goes back to, Jesus, this is ancient history, but spectroscopic studies of light. The guy that came up with the Bunsen burner, and now we're going to science. You may remember when you were in school that burner that had the flame, and you would put like different metals in it, it would burn, and you would see different colors. Well, it turns out when you look at it with a spectroscope, you see different lines for different atoms. And it turns out mercury happens to be one of the atoms on the periodic table that has a very specific resonance pattern. What does that mean? Resonance is the easiest way to understand is, I want you to think about two tuning forks. When this one starts to vibrate, this one vibrates, and it does it with not touching each other. And that kind of freaks people out until they actually see it occur. It turns out when the light that's emitted from blue light, it shares a resonance with the mercury atom. So if you have mercury anywhere in your body for any reason, and there's no rhyme or reason, but probably the number one thing people worry about is if you were to break a thermometer or say a mercury bulb, then you got to clean it up, and say you got it on your skin or it got absorbed in your skin and your hand. When you're in blue light, you likely would have a problem with that hand when blue light illuminated on it. The real issue with mercury resonance, at least in my practice, what I've seen is with dentists. A lot of dentists used to deal with mercury tremendously because they used to put it in amalgams, and they would have a plastic tube that looked like a bullet. They'd put it in a machine that made the amalgam, but that would have mercury in it with several other alloys. And they would amalgamate, that's why it's called amalgam. And it would be a soft metal for a period of time until it got hard. If you drilled any of that out, that mercury would get pushed into tissues if they didn't suck it out. They always did that. Dentists always did that under man-made light. It was never done under either red light or sunlight. So if you think about it, dentistry through its whole history, I mean, that started with Horace Wells, who was the co-discoverer of anesthesia at Mass General. Everybody's always used some version of blue light. So it causes a phenomenon where the blue light can begin to act as an antenna with the mercury and cause problems. And mercury is a very, very reactive metal. So if the metal is in your body, say it's inert, blue light can turn that technical poison from something that's quiet to something that's active. It can make it far worse. And that's the reason why mercury resonance is a huge problem. It's become more of a modern problem. Unfortunately, it's gotten a bad name because the functional medicine doctors, unfortunately, have screwed more people up because they've got this fundamental belief in their head, oh, well, if you eat tuna, you're going to get mercury toxicity. and that's going to cause a problem. No, that's not the number one problem. The number one problem is environmental toxins, usually from organophosphates, which are fertilizers that are in the food. The second one is the one I told you before. You break a bulb, you break a thermometer, that stuff is toxic as all hell. You do not want to clean it up with like a towel and a rag in your house. You probably need to go straight to Google and find out, how do I clean up a mercury spill? Because it's not what you think. And probably the third and most important way people get, I'd say it's the most common way in the United, and probably in the globe, is when your methionine cycle is broken in your body. And that usually is because your redox, mitochondrial redox, is off. And the single biggest factor that you can find in it is your endogenous glutathione level crashes. And what's the thing that builds that up the fastest? We're back to the story again about light. Turns out light fixes the methionine cycle. It's not the methylation powder, it's not the SNPs that you hear from the functional medicine doctors. If your methionine cycle is broken because your mitochondria doesn't have a strong enough voltage coming through it, you are going to collect heavy metals, not just mercury, other ones like cadmium and things like that, in your tissues, because you won't be able to clear them from, the different foodstuffs you eat. That's probably issue number one.
That is so fascinating and very real for a lot of us today, I think, in the modern world that we live in. Look, my next question is purely out of personal curiosity. Is there an ideal place on Earth to live for optimal health? Is such a place, does it exist?
It's a good question. I'm probably going to surprise you when I answer it.
Okay.
There is for every mitochondrial haplotype.
Right.
So
Okay.
guess what? We're back to the story about the cactus. Remember, does the cactus have the ideal place to live? It does. The cactus is not ideal every place in Australia, just like the cactus doesn't have an ideal place every place in the United States. So I would tell you, is that the same reason that Australia has kangaroos and panda bears and the United States doesn't have any? I'm going to tell you, that's also the same effect. See, people need to realize that Einstein wrote another paper about the theory of relativity. And we now know that everything is subject to the theory of relativity. That includes time, but it also includes the question you just asked me. Everything has a best place scenario. Turns out for humans, since we all have mitochondria, the key factor then becomes, what's the best place for those mitochondria to operate? That answer was very easy to give you 120 years ago. That answer has become very difficult in the last 120 years. Why? Because now the environment has been changed by the things that we do to the environment. Blue light, non-native EMF, 2G, 4G, 5G. How about this one? Population density. Remember, most humans, think about Mexico City. Is it normal to have a small, tight geographic area to have 14 million people in that area? The answer is no. And if you don't believe me, you can go on National Geographic and watch the story about Africa. When you see the wildebeest migrate across the continent, animals have normal migratory patterns in different environments. Turns out humans don't have a normal migratory pattern. In fact, this is where the story of Australia becomes interesting. Ties back to what Andy said before. Because Jack, how is it that I'm a white boy with blue eyes in Australia? This just doesn't fit. And he's right. Why? Because he's Northern European by way of Northern Europe, but then guess what? There's a new haplotype that migrated specifically to Australia. So is that haplotype normal to Australia, or is it abnormal? Did it come from somewhere else? And it turns out, because we have human brains, we figured out how to build boats. That's how people in Australia got there. White people that look like you two, you're not indigenous to Australia. Like, evolution would have not put you two in Australia back in the day. The people that are born to live in Australia are the people that live in the middle of that desert, the indigenous people. That's the part of the story that people don't understand, because they assume, okay, well, we have our accents and we are Australian, but why is it that we're having a problem here? And if you think about the question you asked me a long time ago, is this the reason why we have autoimmunity? Is this the reason why we have skin cancer? Is this the reason why people in our country have different issues? Because our engines are mismatched to the environment that we're really at. And this has been magnified over 50, 60, 70, 80 generations. The answer is yes. See, the United States also has the same issue, but here's the irony. The people that form the United States, or I should say the dominant ones now, Northern European, you look at the latitudes of our country, they're kind of the same. Who are the outliers in the United States? They were the indigenous people. Isn't that the same story that's going on in Australia now? Turns out it is. You know, and the American Indian was wiped out by the white man in our country. Do we still have the indigenous people here? Yeah, we do. But guess what? The life that we forced them to live is radically different than the life they used to live. And guess what? They have white man diseases that they didn't have when they weren't ruled by the white man. And guess why that is an important story? It's not a political statement. Some people may take it that way. But what I'm trying to point out to you, it's the environment that dictates where the engine should be. Again, now we're back to the relativity of your question. So the answer is every haplotype does have an ideal place, but unfortunately, the way human civilization has gone doesn't mean that you're in the right ideal place. That's the problem.
That is, yeah. Now, I've always thought of it like that, you know, thinking a little bit more outside the box of, you know, yes, there's a lot of skin cancer in Australia. Is it to do with sunscreen and sunglasses? Probably to a certain extent, but is it to do with the wrong haplotype being in the wrong environment? Probably involved in that as well. And the answer is most definitely yes. I think one final sort of big topic I'd like to cover as well, given it is quite current at the moment, is obviously COVID. You know, we could talk a whole show on this.
You want to open up a can of whoop ass.
Exactly. I know we like to talk about this every day from various perspectives. And, you know, we know that it's not the virus that's obviously killing people. It's the fact that we're all so screwed up from a mitochondrial level is why we're probably having these issues. But, you know, you see studies out there at a very basic level talking about UV light and its, you know, impact in neutralizing the virus, yet we're told to stay indoors, and, you know, other factors involved in blue light and autoimmunity. But, you know, what is I guess the story of light when it comes to something like a COVID-19 type virus?
This one is, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm going to be able to answer this very simply. I thought you were going to make this more complex for me. Viruses are mitochondrial toxins. What does that mean? Remember, the dose makes the toxin. So all coronaviruses, which is what COVID is, tend to show up in certain seasons. The most common season is when the sun is not powerful, when UV light is not present. Yeah. So when you're in spring and summer, coronaviruses are non-existent, they're not an issue. When they tend to be a problem is when sunlight's not present, specifically UV light. That's the reason why every 6 continents, this is now true because we're a year into this, every single continent, one of the things they have found, those that have the highest levels of vitamin D do not get COVID. Those people that have low levels of vitamin D get COVID, and they tend to get all the crazy problems that go along with COVID, like the clotting. Now we have some of the newer problems that you guys don't have a big issue with, but they've had a bigger problem in Europe with, is the unusual variants. It turns out the people that get the unusual variants are the people that have the lowest mitochondrial redox. But what does the virus physically do to the cell? It's kind of like the way I like to think about it. If you think about your mitochondria like a Ferrari, it's like your girlfriend taking sand and dumping it in to the gears in the engine. And what does that do? The car may still work, but it's not going 225 miles an hour. And that's functionally kind of what's going on. The people that are at risk are going to get this. Now, here's the interesting part of the story. The epidemiologists in Australia and the United States believe that COVID is a pathologic disease. I'm going to tell you it's not. I'm going to tell you that it's actually an evolutionary dictum that actually changes our biology. Why? 98% of the human genome, meaning RNA and DNA, is made out of HERV viral oncogenes. These are genes, just like the genes that we get from COVID, that are designed to be imparted, moved around like a casino deck, and for us to use. Why? Those genes, somewhere down the road, as the environment changes, will be a solution to another problem. So it's an issue that our bodies are designed, specifically humans, because no other species on the planet uses viral genes like we do. We shuffle them, they're jump, they go through something called retrotransposons. If you know anything about Barbara McClintock, she won a Nobel Prize. She's the lady that found jumping genes, like it moved from one chromosome to the next one. And, you know, scientists go all the time, why does this happen? Well, it turns out that's how we fix environmental problems. When you have more cards in your deck of solutions, when you're faced with a new environment, you can innovate a new solution. The reason why COVID has been a very interesting situation for us, we now have drug companies that came up with these vaccines that are supposed to be for COVID. You have to understand, messenger RNA vaccines from Moderna and Pfizer use these epigenetic toolbox to actually alter mitochondrial function. We know that that's functionally what's going on. So when you use this kind of tool and you have no idea, earthly idea, Big Pharma has no earthly idea how these things really change mitochondrial redox, it's no shock why we've got people that have long COVID, no shock why people now have these clotting problems. It's no shock why people have these weird symptoms post-vaccine that they get. But, you know, when you're in Australia, you're in the United States, you're watching TV, they all tell you, oh, well, it's not the vaccine that causes this. It's clearly something else. When, guess what? If you know anything about nucleic acids, this is exactly what viruses are designed to do. They're designed to go and shuffle the deck and create something so that we can use it through generations later to overcome a situation. The problem is vaccinations with messenger RNA, they are not normal. The normal way for us to assimilate viruses is to get the virus will play its role when UV light is low. Your immune system is the vaccine with sunlight that keeps mixing the deck. So you have 6 months out of the year where viruses like a coronavirus aren't a problem. That's the 6 months where your immune system is shuffling the deck the right way. The people that are gonna get taken out are the people that are, it's present where the deck is shuffled and it causes complete mitochondrial failure. Those are the people that wind up in the ICU, you know, that get intubated and they don't do well. The big issue is that doctors don't realize it. Your immune system is the mask, is the lockdown that you need. In other words, all of humans need to get this virus. This virus, I think what we now know a year into this, it's not a serious virus. 99.98% of people on planet Earth will survive COVID. Why we've made this that big a deal makes no sense to me at all when you consider, when we look back to 1918, truly 60 to 80 million people, maybe even up to 100 million people died. At that time, we only had 2.8 billion people on the planet. Today, we have close to 8 billion people on planet Earth, and literally not even 1 million people globally have died from this virus. Yet, we're telling people this is horrible. No, it's not. And that's when the real trapdoor opens, the trapdoor that maybe you don't want to step into. Why did this really happen? What's the greater story behind that? And why are people being convinced to take an injection or a jab, as you guys like to call it, for a disease that's 99.98% survivable? Well, it's kind of the same argument. You'd say, well, if that's the case, why aren't we giving, injections to everybody on planet Earth for chickenpox? Because it's 100%. Everybody's going to get it, and shingles are the outcome of that. Shingles are really bad. They hurt, and nobody wants it. Why don't we have the same modus operandi for the chickenpox virus? You have to start asking yourself that question. Is this a biologic reason? Or maybe, is there another reason behind this? And that's, to me, where the story gets really, really interesting.
Sure does. And what crazy times we live in right now. Hey, I feel like we could go on for hours just on this topic in itself, because look, I'm personally dying to know what the reason is behind this all, because like you, I don't believe it is biological. Something just doesn't sit right with me and my gut on it. So time will tell. I guess maybe some theories might come out in a few years' time. Who knows? I guess we just watch this space. But Jack, look, tell us, what's next for you? What do you have coming up in your life, in your area of work?
Well, right now, what I'm doing is I just started a new TV program, Quantum Health TV. So I started doing that this year. Also, a big thing is to help people get into the right environment. The number one thing that I think frustrates people with me and my work is that ultimately I tell them what we just talked about. If your mitochondria is not optimized for the place you live, you got to pick up and likely relocate your life. Most people know that that is not practical advice. So how do you make that medical decision-making practical? You have to teach people how health and wealth are linked. So now I'm teaching people about how to use cryptocurrency to actually optimize their health. And that started with me in 2021, teaching physicians how to move their practice from a centralized medical practice to a decentralized practice. And most people don't understand that nature is a complete decentralized system on Earth. That's where mitochondria function the best. But turns out when it comes to wealth, the best way to protect your wealth is to connect to centralized networks. So one of those centralized networks that's been in operation now for 12 years that mimics many of the things that are present in circadian biology is Bitcoin. The algorithm that is tied to Bitcoin actually has a circadian mechanism at its core. And that circadian mechanism at its core is called the difficulty adjustment. Now, I don't expect a lot of people on the biology side to understand this, but the people that are on the crypto side do understand it. And they understand functionally, if you're in the right light environment, what am I saying from a mitochondrial perspective? It actually frees time up. In other words, you have health span and longevity. The same thing is true on the monetary network. When you plug in to a decentralized network, what do you functionally do? You're able to create huge wealth in short amount of time. And that time can then be utilized to pick up and improve your environment, because then you're no longer tethered to either the centralized medical system or your job that is your anchor to the wrong environment that you're in. And when you realize how to utilize things, it's the same story that you guys probably know. I know at least Andy knows. 10 or 15 years ago, when I started to talk to people about blue light, non-native EMF, everybody thought I was absolutely batshit crazy. Well, now the story is, okay, how do I change my existence? Like I always tell people, you can never get well in the same environment you got sick in. And when you hear that, you're like, well, wait a minute, I live in Sydney, and if I got a melanoma here and I got my colon cut out, and I got this problem, that problem, the other problem, how am I going to pick up and leave when my job is tethered to the economy of Sydney? Well, if you understand, if you were plugged in to a centralized network and you did it early, you'd probably make a whole lot more money that way than you would in your regular job. And I'm teaching people how to do that. In fact, probably in the last 2 months, that's what I've been doing on Clubhouse. I've actually been running rooms on Clubhouse, showing people how health and wealth are linked. And in fact, I'm going to Miami in actually a couple months for the Bitcoin 2021 lecture series. And down there, I'm actually going to meet with a couple of key people. Jack Dorsey from Twitter is going to be one of them. And Michael Saylor from MicroStrategy will be another. And I've been bridging these two communities probably the last 2 years in ways that most people probably would be very surprised at. And I've done it. It's almost kind of like I've done it behind the scenes, not letting the biology people seeing what I'm doing with the crypto people and what's happened on Clubhouse. The two groups, the two tribes are now crashing together, and they're meeting and they're stunned. And the funny thing is, the crypto people have picked up on this really good because they understand decentralized networks. The people on the biology side never realized that nature was decentralized. And I try to tell people that I've told the story about decentralization all the time when I talked about light and dark. Those positive and negative feedback loops are part of that decentralized story. It's the same story that I've told in Yellowstone Park when we took the wolves out. We found out when we took the wolves out, the predator, that the rivers changed course. And when people found that on the biology side, they were like, that's crazy that you could take a predator out, yet the rivers in Yellowstone Park in Wyoming would change. Because people don't understand, when you change coupled oscillators, light and dark, everything else changes. Well, guess what? The crypto people understand that better than you can imagine, because the couple oscillators there are the central banks, the monetary system, how inflation affects money. And the thing is, when that changes, it changes your ability to make wealth. And if you can couple both of these things together, the problem that most people have on the biology side, when they say, Jack, I don't have the money to pick up and change and do the things that I do. Well, now I'm showing them how to make that money and actually do it, and vice versa. The people on crypto who are always on technology that have all this wealth, I'm like, what good is your wealth if you don't have health? I mean, just think about it. It makes no sense at all to have millions of dollars and then die, at 60 or 50 years old. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's beginning to resonate. Let's just put it that way. It's been one of those things about COVID that's been very, very interesting.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. And I have seen you talk a lot more about that, I guess, coming together of the two tribes and discussing, I guess, that sort of decentralization of nature and obviously currency and combining the two. So, I highly recommend everyone go and tune into that, because it is like mind-blowing stuff as always. One question we like to finish on, Jack, it's a bit of a deviation away from light, but I'm sure you're tied in somehow to the work you're doing, which is awesome, is if you could time travel, when and where would you go?
It's got you thinking now, hasn't it? I can see.
Right now.
Yeah.
The only time you can change your existence is the present. The past is looking through the rearview mirror. You can't do anything about it. The only thing the past can teach you is lessons. But remember, the past never repeats exactly. It only rhymes. The future is completely untold. The future unfolds based on what happens today. So I would always choose to be in the present. But the key is you have to see the present through eyes that are open, mind that's open. Always be open to new data, because what you believed yesterday will always be changed by what you know today.
So true.
Yeah.
That's an epic answer.
That is really, really good.
I say that's one of the best we've had.
Yeah.
Wow. Love it. Thank you for sharing that with us. Jack,
I had to think about it.
Yeah.
I had to think about it.
True, true. You did put you on the spot a bit there. Look, if people want to connect with you, where can they find you? Where's the best channels to reach you?
Probably the easiest place, if you want to be a member of the site, that's Kruse@destin.com. If you just want to read some of the stuff that I write, like you want to sample, that would be my Patreon blog, patreon.com/Dr. Jack Kruse. All my old stuff is on jackkruse.com. The new TV show is at quantumhealthtv.com. And the book is out, the old book. It's still pretty damn good. It's been out there, and my new book will be coming out very shortly. I've got a new book coming out. It's ready to rock and roll.
Oh, buzzing for that one. I've read the old one. That was one of the first first ones I read. Paleo RX, wasn't it? That one.
Epi
Paleo RX. Yeah, that's the one. But
on Amazon.
Yeah, so I can't wait for the next one. That's going to be epic. And, you know, I recommend everyone go and check out Jack's website, and, you know, you'll be down the rabbit hole straight away. And Jack's got some excellent options as well in terms of memberships to sign up for. So definitely get involved with that as well. And thank you so much for joining us, Jack. I really appreciate you taking time out to speak to us all the way from the US. And we will no doubt connect again soon. And thank you so much for enlightening our audience with your amazing knowledge and different ways of getting people to think about things as well.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, no problem. Take care, guys.